Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another LIDNUG presentation. As usual, we'll just quickly run through the housekeeping and what have you first. Again, if it wasn't for our wonderful sponsors, we would not be able to do any of this that we do. Thanks to Oxweb, Telerik, Plural Sites Infusion, and the others that routinely give us their support. These are our links. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and the bit.ly link there will take you straight to our LinkedIn group. And if you have any queries, email us info@lidnug.org and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. Coming up in March, we have on March the 16th, Python for the C# developer with Michael Kennedy. And on March the 13th, the Fundamentals of AngularJS Directives with Dave Baskin. Please note, because of current circumstances, we may have to move these back 1 hour. So instead of them being 10 AM PST, they may be 11 AM PST. However, as always, if you go to lidnugevents.eventbrite.com, all the current and latest information to register will be on there. Today we have Brock Allen, who's going to talk to us about OWIN and Katana, the new HTTP host for web apps. This is Brock's first event for LIDNUG. He has 20 years worth of IT experience, is a member of ThinkTecture, and works with others such as Michael Kennedy on Developmentor, training other developers. So please give Brock a big warm welcome and take it away, Brock.
All right, thank you very much. So thanks everyone for having me. Let me switch over here to my desktop. Does that look good? Good. Okay. So yeah, thanks for having me. What I'm going to talk about, this is actually I have 3 talks scheduled, and they kind of relate together. And we're starting here at the most sort of fundamental one here. The first one is about OWIN and Katana, this new HTTP hosting model that Microsoft has released with Visual Studio 2013 and Web API v2 and MVC5 that all came out at the end of last year. I have 2 follow-up talks that are scheduled for, I don't know, down the road a couple months, and those piggyback on top of this topic. So this is sort of the fundamental. The other 2 down the road are both security related, and that's one of the motivators actually for this topic today. Is because one of the big changes in last year's release was that all of the new security plumbing for web applications are going to be built on top of this fundamental framework called OWIN and Katana. So these all definitely stack on top of one another. So anyway, this talk is about the fundamentals of OWIN and Katana. We're going to talk about kind of what it is, what it means, how it relates to you and your code, and some things you can do with it. Here's some info about me down at the bottom. Again, you can reach me mainly at the website, brockallen.com, if you have any questions or follow-up. And I'll post the demos and samples from today as well on my blog there. Just quickly about me, I mainly do web development and with a focus in web security. So I do a lot of open source work for ThinkTecture. If any of you have run across ThinkTecture Identity Server or Authorization Server, we do a lot of open source security projects there. And then I do train as well for Developmentor. So we do training on ASP.NET and MVC and Web API and all of these great topics. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. So we're going to look at it, like I said, what this thing called OWIN and Katana is. You've probably heard about them. So we're going to talk a little bit about the motivation for them, kind of where Microsoft is coming from in introducing them, and really what some of the goals are, at a high level, what you can do with these things. And then we'll write some code, and I'll just kind of give you a little bit of exposure to the APIs. Also, this hopefully will be helpful in at least, like I said, this is one of 3 talks, but hopefully at least the starter code that we're going to look at today helps you understand when you do file new projects now in Visual Studio 2013, because this, that's sort of like things are moved around now. So anyway, this is the foundations of that. And then on top of OWIN and Katana, so it's this fundamental web hosting infrastructure that we're going to look at. On top of that, then, we can look at how you would build an application. And I'm not going to go into all of Web API or SignalR or anything, but I'm just going to sort of show you that this is the foundation that these other frameworks then can sit on top of. And so we'll look at some of that at the end. So, OWIN and Katana. So, like the title of the session is the new web hosting or the new web hosting framework, if you will, for Microsoft. So prior to this, we had ASP.NET. All right, ASP.NET, in my mind, not the one ASP.NET, but ASP.NET fundamentally is the stuff that came out. Oh my gosh, it must have been 12 or 13 years ago now, system.web.dll. It was basically originally ASP.NET Web Forms, and then Web Forms sat on top of this framework called the HTTP pipeline. And so that was Microsoft's, basically their web stack for .NET developers, and it's been around for a long time. When it was originally developed, some 12 plus years ago, ASP.NET Web Forms was the target framework, and the mindset at the time was that's how people were going to be doing web development on the Microsoft stack. System.web, which is what we now kind of, in retrospect call this ASP.NET runtime, and you'll hear that a lot from Microsoft as well. But System.web is an old runtime. Like I said, it's been around for a long time. The assumptions at the time it was developed were basically to support web forms, and of course now today we have all these other types of applications that we're building, and we really can't sit on top of this framework anymore. Basically, like I said, there's a lot of legacy code. It's been around a long time. The assumptions that it was developed under just isn't flexible enough for the new demands of today's applications. I think Web API and SignalR are sort of the two big showcases of that. SignalR actually found a lot of bugs in ASP.NET when they were trying to do all their load and really try to scale out. And the problem with that, of course, is that with such an old framework, anytime they fix a bug, they end up introducing new ones. So unfortunately, ASP.NET, or the original ASP.NET, System.web, the fundamental hosting model, just needs to go away. Now, that doesn't mean it's not going to be supported, but for new types of applications, Microsoft's realized that they need a lighter weight and more flexible framework. So, performance is another one too. Again, when I was talking about SignalR, I mean that's a showcase for trying to scale out your servers. They're trying to get tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of connections to a single web server. And the traditional ASP.NET stack, just wasn't designed for that. So that's one of the motivations for this new hosting architecture. A lot of people sort of freak out about this OWIN and Katana move because they're worried that Microsoft's not going to do IIS anymore. So there's a distinction between IIS and ASP.NET on top of that. IIS is still very much going to stay, but it's the code that integrates from IIS to your .NET code or the framework you're using, like Web API or SignalR, and that's the piece that needs to get revved. Okay, so IIS is very fast, but again, because System.web's legacy, that tends to bog things down. So that, for Microsoft's standpoint, they need something new. Another motivation for this OWIN and Katana is sort of a mindset. When you create a new MVC project in Visual Studio, this is what your new project looks like, right? You have this massive configuration file with all of these settings that need to get tweaked and configured. I mean, this is the starter config file. And then over on the right is all the references of all the projects we end up getting, okay? So again, maybe people don't think of this as an issue, but it's sort of this mode that we have been lulled into accepting as, kind of how our new projects work. How often do you need, I don't know, over here on the right, how often do you need system.drawing or system.enterprise services in your, MVC code? Probably not a lot, but they throw all this baggage at you when you create a new project, okay? So again, maybe you never even thought about that as a problem. But contrast this to the Node community, right? People have been talking about NodeJS for several years now. It is very, well, they just have a different attitude and mindset, okay? And so, in a sense, there's a little bit of a sort of envy, if you will, about that the Node community, because look, in like, what is this, 5 lines of code on the screen, they can get up a web server that's just running and hosting, HTTP requests. So there's a little bit of a philosophical difference between sort of your attitude or your approach, but there's something to be said about a Node environment with 5 lines of code, and you can have a web server up and running. So this is another kind of motivator. I'm not saying that's the only motivator or necessarily the driving motivator, but there is something to be said about this other style of coding, where what you can do is you can spin up a web server with very, very minimal code, and the attitude from the Node community is very much you start small and then you add stuff as you need. Okay, so again, going back to the previous picture here, there's just so much stuff we get with MVC that we probably don't really even need. Okay, so again, this sort of a philosophical difference, and so the attitude with OWIN is that you can start small, or you even will start small, and then you'll add packages as you need functionality. That's kind of the idea. Okay, so what is this thing OWIN that I've been talking about? What is it really? Okay, well, there's 2 things I'm going to talk about: OWIN and Katana. OWIN is a specification. Basically, it is a specification to model what a web server needs to provide to an application. So in other words, you're building a web application, and you're going to need to know things about the incoming HTTP request, like the URL and what the method is, and maybe there's a request body, what the headers are, and then you're going to need some way to perhaps write to the output, to the response. You can add headers and set the status code and set the body, things like that. So this is what OWIN fundamentally is. It is a specification for the interaction between a HTTP server and the application code that wants to use that. And really, this specification gives you an abstraction and a level of indirection to the actual server itself. And so a lot of times people, when they hear about OWIN, they hear a lot about self-hosting versus IIS hosting. And so that does, this OWIN specification can help facilitate that. So if you have an application that is written to use OWIN, then you are decoupled from which web server you're actually running in. Okay, now there's going to be a layer in there so that, yes, you can run under IIS, or yes, you can run somewhere else like a self-host, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the idea is that OWIN gives you this level of indirection, and it makes your application, again, decoupled from the web server. Because they're starting from scratch as well, it kind of is like a nice clean reboot for building these web servers. And so again, contrast this against like an ASP.NET application, MVC, or web forms, where your web server is actually system.web. So system.web, again, is assuming IIS, right? It's assuming that old legacy stack. And so you have to put up with that implementation. OWIN, like I said, decouples that, and you don't necessarily have to be using any particular implementation here. So let me get a question here already. So does OWIN specification is specific to .NET only? Yeah, so the name of OWIN is Open Web Interface for .NET. And so what they do is they define in .NET primitives the specification. So I'll just kind of skip ahead real quick, or at least I'll describe it real quick. The specification really boils down to a dictionary of objects. So it's a string object pair. And this dictionary has entries in it which represent the things that a web server needs to provide. Like I said, like the HTTP method, the URL, the headers of the request, a way to set the status code of the response, headers in the response, the body of the response, so on and so forth, okay? So it's a dictionary, and it's defined in .NET terms, right? So, I mean, we can even go to owin.org real quick here, if my connection will allow. So here's the OWIN spec, right? owin.org, nice, go read up on that. But here's the specification. If you look, let's go real quick. So the spec here is actually pretty small. It's only like 8 pages long. But what they have, and there are 2 fundamental things in the specification that I'll be talking about. One is this thing called the app func, and you can see these are, all in .NET terms, okay? So we use funcs. There's this dictionary I was talking about, and they include task in there as well. So it's all fundamentally asynchronous. So this is one thing. This is basically how your code gets glued in. And again, I'll code this up in a demo in a minute. And then the other thing is this dictionary I was talking about. And the dictionary, they call it the environment. That's the environment dictionary. And here's the specification. It says it has to have a key called request body, and the data type is a stream. It has to have a key called, request method, and that is a string. Request headers, which is yet another dictionary. So this is the specification that OWIN puts forth. Okay? So what will happen then is you're going to have an implementation then of this dictionary, and maybe it's on top of IIS, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's on some other web server, right? In theory, it could be like on top of Apache. Your .NET code, though, you just code to this level of indirection, this abstraction, and then in theory you're portable if that's a concern for you. Okay? Now, again, not to freak everybody out, not everybody cares about being portable, which is totally fine as well. So there are two sides of this. There's like sort of what you can get as a benefit of this level of indirection and coding to this new abstraction. That's portability. That's one of the big things. And self-hosting is another one. That's related. The other side, though, is Microsoft gets a benefit out of this. Microsoft's starting to have more and more frameworks, right? They have Web Forms, MVC, SignalR, Web API, and who knows what in the future, okay? The problem with that is they have all these different frameworks, and they have to provide features that are, they have to provide similar features across all these frameworks. So they have to figure out how to do security across all these libraries is again, the big candidate, and that's what the other talks later are going to talk about. But these, so security is an example. They don't want to have to re-implement security in SignalR and then Web API and then MVC because they're doing that effort 3 different times. So what Microsoft has done now is everything is moving to the SignalR style. Your application framework then will be plugging into SignalR, and they can implement the security features once at the SignalR level. And no matter which framework you end up using, you get the benefit of these reusable functionalities that Microsoft's creating. Okay? So again, people look at this and they're like, sometimes, like I said, if all they care about is IIS, they look at OWIN and they say, why do I even care? What's the real benefit? Okay? And again, if you don't care about self-hosting or platform portability, then maybe you don't, except all the new code from Microsoft sits on top of this. So you do have to care in a sense. Even though you're not directly benefiting from this. Well, that's a bad way to put it, but you're indirectly benefiting at least from Microsoft's frameworks. Okay, so hopefully that makes it clear sort of like where this fits into the picture. Okay, so anyway, that's the dictionary, that's the spec. Like I said, it's really short. I mean, it's all of like, that's the end of it, like 8 pages long or something. So anyway, I'll start to code up some samples here in a minute, okay? Okay, so that's the idea with OWIN. OWIN is a specification. Katana kind of goes with this because what Katana is Microsoft's implementation of this specification. So the idea, as I was saying, is that OWIN is a level of indirection. It's just this dictionary specification. Well, somebody has to implement the dictionary, and that's where Microsoft steps in. So Microsoft has this thing they're calling Katana. It is going to be this server that will implement the OWIN interface, and they actually have several implementations. Obviously, some that run out of IIS, but others that allow you to do what's called self-hosting. So again, you could host SignalR in a console application or a Web API. That's kind of the idea. Again, maybe you don't need to, but that's it allows for that. Katana then goes further than this. If I go actually back to the specification, if you want to write to the body of the response, you have to go into the dictionary and grab even reading the request body or even writing the response body, and you have to go and use it at the stream level. Well, if you've been doing ASP.NET at all, then you know about response.write that takes a string, and you can just write out like AH1 tags. Okay. Well, with a low-level stream, that's kind of a pain. Okay. So coding against this low-level dictionary is probably not what you want to do with your time. So that's the next thing that Katana provides is a set of convenience classes on top of the environment dictionary. And so it provides you a little bit more of an abstract programming model, much like we had in ASP.NET, right? I'm sure you guys have used the request and the response objects. That's what OWIN is going to get for us. So they have this context, OWIN context, with an OWIN request and an OWIN response to make the programming against this a little bit easier. Okay? And then, like I said, the last bit of things that Microsoft provides is a set of middleware, and I'll talk about this term middleware here in a minute. But remember, I said that they're going to be providing common functionality that needs to be made available in all of their frameworks. Well, they do it at this abstract level against an OWIN interface with the Katana, their implementation's Katana, and so they're providing the common functionality for authentication or some other things. CORS, they have some new stuff that they put out recently, which is you can host static files. So imagine you're doing self-hosting in a console application. Well, you also maybe want to serve up some HTML files or JavaScript files. And so usually that would be IIS, but if you're self-hosting, that's a problem. So that's another thing that they're starting to introduce. So in a sense, this is all really like it's like re-implementing the stuff that we all kind of already have come to rely upon at IIS, but they need to do this at this OWIN abstraction level to achieve their level of indirection goals. Okay, so anyway, we're just now starting to get this common, the set of libraries from Microsoft. Their big push at the end of last year was all around authentication, and now in the last, they just did a 0.1 release in the last couple months, and they're adding more and more. So there'll be more and more stuff coming, and that this is, like I said, where Microsoft's putting all their effort for common functionality. Okay, so here's the high-level architecture, and then we'll get into coding. Okay, so again, OWIN as a specification, they define kind of these different roles. So the first thing is this concept of a host. Host is just the process that's running this code. So this could be IIS's host, or it could be like your console app that you might write, or a WPF app or something like that. So that's basically just the starter code. We then have this concept of an OWIN server. This is what actually implements the OWIN specification, the dictionary that I talked about. So Microsoft would have an OWIN server. If you're running in IIS as a host, then they have an OWIN server that then taps into the IIS mechanism. If you're running your own console application, then there's a different OWIN server that actually uses the HTTP listener from .NET, okay? And that can listen for requests. So the OWIN server is kind of the piece responsible for doing the HTTP level stuff and making the API available to the rest of the application. So the next thing is this thing called middleware. Middleware are the components that are designed to run in an OWIN server. Okay, so this is the code that depends on the dictionary environment that I talked about earlier. And these guys are going to process requests. The programming model with OWIN is that these middleware are linked into your application. So you end up registering the middleware that you want, and then the other stuff that you don't want, you don't include it. So this is actually, this design of middleware helps solve the problem of your runtime being too bloated with stuff you don't need. So this is solving the system web problem that I talked about earlier. So then you're probably going to have some application actually running in this thing, and so that's probably like Web API or SignalR or even both. Okay, and then what happens is, like I said, these middleware are chained together to form like a linked list. And so the processing model is this: when a request comes in from the client, the browser or a programmatic client, then it comes in through the host, to your OWIN server that's actually listening on HTTP, and then whatever middleware you have configured, then the request will travel through the middleware. Okay? So the one you register first, it gets first crack at the request, and then it chains to the next one, and it gets second crack, and then finally it'll go into your application. And then your application will actually generate whatever response, and then on the way out, then these guys get to look at the response on the way out. Okay? Now, the funny thing about this picture is this actually looks a lot like the system.web programming model that we've had for 12 years ago. These look like HTTP modules, and this kind of looks like an HTTP handler. And it really is very, very similar. Okay? So you have these things that get to intercept requests. By the way, these things, these middleware, they can chain to the next one. like kind of like what's being shown here, or just like in ASP.NET today, HTTP modules can short circuit. They can say, you know what, the request is coming in and the user isn't authenticated, and I'm not going to let the call continue to the application. So they can short circuit the request and generate the response right away. Okay? So anyway, that's an option of the middleware though. Okay, so let's go write some code then to get the stuff, to get a concrete example or in our heads what this is all about. So let's run Visual Studio here real quick. So I'm going to go create a new project. Let's do the console app real quick and dirty. So let's do OWIN console app. Okay. So what I need to do is I'm going to do a console app again just to show you it works here, and then we'll switch over and use IIS. So the idea here is this OWIN console app. That's my host. Okay. I need to pull in an OWIN server. That's the blue box here. So the OWIN server, like I said, OWIN is a spec. So we actually need a concrete implementation, and that's where Katana comes in. So I'm going to go grab via NuGet the Katana server here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in, if I have to go a couple of ones in here, OWIN self-host. I think this is the one. Okay? So I'm going to do install. So what I've grabbed is Microsoft's, this is actually Katana. So Microsoft.OWIN is basically the Katana stuff. Okay? So I'm going to go hit that. And this actually gives me even a little text file that I can just copy and paste from to get this configured. So it pops open this. Good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do two things in here. I'm going to go create a class called startup. Okay. And it's going to have a public void configuration and an IApp builder. Okay. So what this is, if I can actually type here, this startup class is a convention with Katana. You have a class called startup. It's in the namespace of the hosting application, and it has a method called configuration, and it accepts an IApp builder. This will be automatically invoked when your app starts up. This is sort of like the moral equivalent of app start from global.asax, from good old ASP.NET. Okay, so it's kind of like that. This method is where you register the middleware and the application that you want to use. So the stuff that you want, this is where you pick it. Okay? So what we have to do is register some middleware. So I'm going to show you doing middleware from scratch. Okay? So the way we do middleware from scratch is I said that middleware is code that will receive a request, and then you can chain on to the next guy in the chain. So these middlewares are actually classes or objects at runtime. So I'm going to go create some class. Okay, so I'll call it middleware 1 for lack of a better name. Okay? And so the method that gets invoked for these to process a request is you do public task invoke, and the parameters that gets passed here is the iDictionary of string object. So this is the environment that I was talking about. Okay? So this method then is the one that will, let's do return task from result of just 0. Okay? And what we could do is we could simply do, let's just see if this works, for each var key in environment.keys. Okay, and we'll do a console write of the key, and then we'll do the value, say. Okay, and so we'll do key and the environment of the key, like that. Okay, so what this does, this just loops over all the keys and dumps them out to the console window. Okay, that's why I did a console app, just so we can see this. All right. So invoke now, what this does is I'm actually sort of terminating the request. So if I had more than one middleware, it would actually be skipping them. I would be returning immediately. Okay, so that's actually kind of raises the question is like, well, how does this middleware get registered, and how does the next one come into play? So that's up here in configuration. This is what the IApp builder does. App.use, and you can do the type of your middleware. So you put in the name of your class. Okay, if I had more than one. So let's do a second one here. So like middleware 2, okay. There's a little convenience function. Instead of app.use, you can just do app.use of middleware 2 like that. Pretty obvious helper, okay. So the use is kind of like the bare bones approach, and the use with the generic here is an example of like one of the helpers from Katana. At least the mindset there is to make it a little bit easier. Okay? So this actually chains two middlewares together. Except my middleware is not quite done because I don't actually have a way to chain them together yet. So the other thing with middleware is that to form the chain, like we see on the screen here, when they construct the middleware, the parameter to the constructor is the next middleware in the chain. Okay? So your middleware has a reference to the next guy, and then it's up to you if you call the next guy in the chain or not. Okay? So this is a little funky how they do this, but we're going to do a constructor. And what gets handed to you is the next guy. And the way they model that is with the func that I'd shown you. If I still have it up here, this func right here, they call this the app func. It's basically a reference to the next guy's invoke function. So what it is, it's a func that is an iDictionary of string object. And your func has to return a task. Okay, that's totally weird to look at, but that's what it is. So you have to hold on to this as a member variable. Invoke, when you get invoked, you can either short circuit the request by returning, or the other approach is you can actually do return next, and you pass along the environment. Okay? So this is very, very low-level kind of approach to building these. I'll show a little bit easier way in a minute, but this is the fundamental stuff. Okay? So my middleware 2 needs the same sort of programming model. And middleware 2, in this case, maybe middleware 2 terminates. Okay? So I'll just do console write line that, middleware 2 was called. Okay? And so up here, I'll do middleware 1 was called. Okay. Hopefully, we're wired up. The last thing I need to do then is in main, I need to initiate the server here. So because I am self-hosted, there's a little helper that just really loads up the whole HTTP listener that's going to be used. And it will then call my startup. And so that's the other tidbit from this little README. And this is a nice little snippet. We just copy it, and we paste it in here to main. You could do this anywhere, obviously, in your, whatever application you're building. So pull in the right namespace. Okay. So what this does is it says basically open up an HTTP listener, open it up at this, address, and use this startup class as our configuration. Okay. And then we just sit there, and the app is running. So I'll just dump out. We're ready. Okay. All right. If I didn't mess anything up, I think this is good to go. So I've kind of done a lot of code here, but again, we're hosting, self-hosting, Katana. We're configured to use 2 middlewares, and then in here, the first middleware prints out hello, basically, and then prints all the keys out, and the second middleware terminates the request. And he doesn't go to, if there was a third, he doesn't even go to it. Okay? So let's give this a whirl. Let's run it. Okay, my console window says ready, so I guess that means, let me go grab the URL. Copy that. Go to my little browser over here. Let's pop the console window here, and I will paste in the URL. Okay, and yeah, looks like something worked. Okay, now I didn't print out anything in the result. If you actually look here in the network, and I'll hit refresh, I did a localhost request. It returned 200 OK, which is good. I set my request headers and response headers and whatever. So the point is I made a request, and it came back with a success result. There's just nothing in the body. Here's what we actually printed out on the console then. So here's the middleware 1 was called. The request. Oh, that's funny. My browser's actually requesting the favorite icon. Let's actually see if we can hit the first request. There we go. There's the request for the home. The root of the website. So the middleware 1 was called. Here's the key, the request path, the response headers, the request headers, the response body, request body. You get the idea. Here was the status code. Here's the query string. So actually, this is just inspecting the stuff coming in. Let's actually go change one of these guys. Okay. So anyway, hopefully you can see that this thing got called. We're in a console app, and you have this dictionary. So let's go in my middleware 1. we get to, let's not print out the dictionary anymore. We don't need to do that. So we'll get called on the way in. We'll then execute the next guy in the chain, which is this guy down here that does something. And then actually, you know what? Let's actually change the status code after. That's kind of back to my picture over here, was these middleware get a chance to look at the request on the way in and on the way out. So it's obvious on the way in where you do that. You do it before you call to the next guy. But if you want to affect something on the response after everyone else has executed, you would do it here after. Except the problem is we're invoking the next and we're returning that task. So what we can do is use the new async and await keywords in C#. And now what will happen is whatever code happens after the await will be after the next guy has run. So I can go to the environment. I can go to the OWIN response status code, and I can set it to be, you know, I don't know, 404, something like that. Okay? So I'll do a build like that. I'll run this one more time. Okay? I will open up my browser. I'll hit refresh. And now if you notice, our response status code there is 404. Okay? So I think it was called once for the home page and then once for the favorite icon. I probably should put out the path there. But anyway, you get the idea. Any questions about that? That's super low-level stuff. Usually you don't code at this level. Well, it depends what you're doing. You might code at this level. But that's kind of the pipeline that you'll hear about with OWIN. You register middleware, and they get put into this linked list. And this is really like the bare-bones implementation. So I'll you go ahead. If you have any questions, pop them up there. What I'll do is I'm going to just continue on. So I talked here about the dictionary that OWIN provides is just some of the items here that I already showed you from the specification website. The other thing then is the middleware, like I said. The convention is you have this invocation method that hands you the environment, and then you, using the low-level APIs, can affect look at the request and affect the response. Middleware needs to get chained together, so this is the whole linked list aspect, and that's where the constructor needs to take the reference to the next one in the list. Now, and then here's the configuration for middleware. Okay, so you typically have a startup that chains together whatever you need, and now the idea here actually at this point is, say you package this up into some library. Now that library could be hosted in different hosts if you care. Okay. Okay, here's kind of a picture of what we did here. So I actually did a non-IIS demo here. I was running in a self-hosted application. So I built the EXE. I then loaded in the self-host library from Katana that uses HTTP listener under the covers, and then we registered, whatever my middleware was. They actually have another non-IIS host. It's called OWIN host, and all this is it is the EXE. So OWIN host, they provide the EXE, and then you are a DLL that gets registered in it to do your configuration. So that's really just the difference between these two. You build the EXE, or they provide one for you, and you plug in with a DLL. Okay, so that's kind of the model for self-hosting. Of course, if you're IIS hosting, you'll be doing IIS hosting. Okay, so self-hosting uses the HTTP listener approach. Again, there are other people who have implemented the actual server. There's actually one called NodeJS, which is kind of a bad name, but it is basically an independent implementation, not coming from Microsoft. It's up on GitHub, actually, if you want to go look at it. So that's an interesting one as well. So if you are doing IIS hosting, then there are actually two different options for servers. So you'll do IIS as the actual host, and then you can either pick System Web or this new thing called Helios. And what we have here is when they were first building OWIN and Katana, they already had, System.web already had its own hosting model. So I think it was just easier and faster for Microsoft to get up and running on what they already had. But they have their own server that sits on top of System Web right here to integrate with IIS. So again, like I said, from the motivation at the beginning was like, this is the thing we want to get rid of. But I think, like I said, for their first sort of, to get something out of the gate, they had to build something like this. So eventually, though, what's going to happen is there's this new project right now is in either alpha or beta, and what makes it different is that it plugs right into the low-level IIS APIs. So anyway, we'll totally eliminate the system web, stack basically. One thing I should mention, by the way, I kind of didn't talk about this at the beginning. So a lot of this motivation for OWIN is for frameworks that want to be, independent or get away from system web. The only big problem with doing that is that Microsoft's two biggest frameworks are still sitting on system.web, which is web forms and MVC. So, who knows in the future what they're going to do with those. But right now, those, of course, are still needing system web. So that's actually another reason why you might want to stick with system web here, is that maybe you want some stuff in OWIN or Katana, but you still have an application written in MVC. Okay? So actually, that's yet another reason why system web needs to exist. Okay? Okay, so actually, let me switch over real quick and just show one of these two guys, just to show you that this all still works from those as well. So let me do a new project in Visual Studio. And so I'll just show you quickly before I get too far. I have a question. So does web.config files still get used with self-host and Helios? So the question from is, so in self-host, you're running your own exe. So what you have is apt.config. But you're not loading ASP.NET in your self-host. So all of the system web settings that you're familiar with aren't going to have any, not apply. With Helios, Helios, same thing. You're not going to be loading in system web. So things like session state, any of that configuration, or the, anything that would have been configured or managed with ASP.NET just isn't going to be loaded. It's not going to be available. Actually, my next demo, I'll even show you that concretely. Okay. So let me show my next demo, and if this doesn't answer your question, go ahead and ask it again, okay? All right. So where was I here? Let me open up my other Visual Studio, which doesn't seem to be loading, strangely enough. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new project. This is now OWIN in, the IIS OWIN example. So I'm going to do an empty web project. I'm not going to load in web forms or any of this other stuff, just pure empty web project. So this, by default, is going to use IIS Express, but that's the same as essentially as using IIS. And so what I'm going to do is, actually, let's do this. Let's go create my startup. Startup CS that we already had. Okay, and I'll actually go to the other project and just copy all this code. There's startup, there's middleware 1, there's middleware 2, and I'll copy these in here. So the thing I did not copy over was the main, basically, because that's the role of the host. Okay, but I did copy over all the Katana configuration. Now, I don't have the IApp builder or any of these yet, so I need to go grab the assemblies off of NuGet. So we'll go up here. Fetch them quickly here. Hopefully Visual Studio holds up on me. There we go. So I'll grab OWIN System Web Hosting. So this is the one where we are loading in ASP.NET to do our OWIN hosting. So I'll hit accept. Pull all this in. I'll hit close. I'll pull in all my namespaces here to get this all running. And the only thing that's not going to work here is this console write line. So let's instead switch this over to write to the response. Now, again, writing to the response is kind of low level. That's kind of painful at this environment level. So I told you one of the other things Katana provides is convenience functions or convenience wrappers for the environment. So what they have is this concept of a OWIN context, okay? And so the OWIN context is the abstract programming model against the HTTP, the OWIN environment dictionary. So what you do is you simply pass in the environment as a constructor argument to the OWIN context. And now we have context dot, request dot, URI or dot, what's the query string, right? They do query string parsing for you and all of that, right? So this programming model with the OWIN context should be more familiar from an ASP.NET developer because it's request response. It doesn't have exactly every same API that the HTTP context would have, but it's logically the same idea. So what I'll do is I'll do context.
Hi all, just bear with us. It looks like Brock might be having a few problems there.
Oh, what happened? My connection get hung up?
Yeah, you keep sort of dropping in and out a little bit, Brock.
Okay.
I'm not sure whether it's your connection or your machine struggling to keep up.
Oh, maybe all my super fast typing.
Not a problem.
Am I back synced up now?
Yeah, you seem to be.
Okay, good. So where I was I was trying to show, and now I lost my train of thought. Oh, the OWIN context. So the OWIN context provides us convenience functions, and so I'm going to use the response to write out there instead of console write line. Same thing with the response status code. I'll do the context.response.status code is 404 or whatever I want. Okay, and then in here I'll do the same sort of thing. I'll do middleware 2 is called. Okay. All right. If I didn't mess anything up. Oh, I didn't pull my OWIN context into the other method. So this is a very common technique. Is what you do is you get the dictionary if you're coding at the low level, raw API. So this, hopefully, we'll see that they got called. Yeah, everything right. Then I got my 404 status code. Okay, not the prettiest UI in the world, but I think mechanically, hopefully you guys see that this is working. So that's running in, going back to my picture here, this is running in the system web server. So IIS is my host, and I'm pulling in all the ASP.NET stuff. So you could actually then use this, middleware, and then also put in like ASPX pages and things like that in here as well. So I could throw in ASPX, and this stuff would run, before it or after it potentially. Okay. The other thing though I wanted to show you was Helios real quick. So we'll show Helios. So Helios is, and again, just to show you one last time. So we have system.webReference that shows you that this needs, ASP.NET. So what I can do is instead of pulling in system web, I can pull in, let's get rid of the system web hosting. We'll uninstall it. Okay. We're going to go ahead and keep OWIN and these references. I now need to go to my pre-release, and I need to go look for OWIN, and I will have to go probably, I don't want to hunt around for it too much. We'll do OWIN host.is. Oops, wrong. There we go. So here it is. It's microsoft.owin.host.iis. That is Helios. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and include this. Notice it says I need IIS 8 and also needs .NET 4.5.1. So let me go put this in here. And I need to change I probably need to change my project to be 4.5.1. There we go. Okay. All right. So hopefully this will run. Still works, which is good. Okay. But here's the thing I really want to show you is I'm going to come in here now and say, you know what? I don't need data annotations. I don't need configuration. I don't need data. I don't need data set extensions, so on and so forth. Okay. So I got rid of the stuff I don't need, and I can run, and here we go. We're still running. Okay? So now I've basically shed system web and all of the baggage that comes with. Levi Broderick is one of the developers at Microsoft working on this, and he put a blog post up in the last few days talking about the perf benefits, and he did kind of it wasn't quite an apples to apples comparison, but he did just show like raw numbers, and basically they flooded a web server with a bunch of requests, and he said that each request into system K of memory. I'm sorry, yeah, I think that's right, 28K. I'd have to go double check the blog post. But when they switched over to Helios, each request took like 1.1K of memory. So, I mean, that's a huge difference in terms of the overhead of the raw overhead of system web hosting versus not using it. Okay. So anyway, that was quite an interesting thing. Okay. So hopefully you guys are getting the idea here. I talked about the OWIN context as the convenience on top of the dictionary. There are a couple other helpers, by the way, just to show you. So in terms of OWIN, my console app, let's go ahead and close that. Let me go to my Helios app. So there are a few things here like use, like I showed. There's also a convenience function where instead of you coding up an entire middleware class, you can do use, and you actually pass in a context as a parameter. So you can just do an inline, lambda expression. Actually, they pass you the context, and they pass you the next. That's actually the signature. Okay, so you can do context dot response dot write async. This is now middleware 3, say. Like this. Okay, we can make this async. If I can spell it right. And we can await this, and then we can invoke next. Okay. So if I didn't mess up my signature there, then you can do a little convenience function that then, and I'm sure my browser is caching. Oh, did middleware 2? Look what middleware 2 did. I was expecting that to work, and then I forgot. Look at my middleware 2. It actually didn't call the next guy. Middleware 1 did, but middleware 2 did not. So that's actually a good example of short-circuiting the request. Okay, let's go ahead and have middleware 2 actually call to the next guy in the chain. And so now, there we go. We got middleware 3. Okay. All right. So anyway, that's an example of some of the convenience functions. There's one more that I'll just mention. It's kind of nifty. Is that notice this is forming one pipeline. It's a series of middlewares. Well, there is a little helper function here which you can do called app.map. And map allows you to set up paths and what this does, it allows you to branch in the middleware, if that makes sense. So what happens here is now map is saying, okay, if the request comes in, always use middleware 1 first. Okay. If the URL then starts with foo, then use the rest of this middleware that's inside of this lambda configuration function. Okay, and it really is branching, so it will only use middleware 2. Okay, and whatever else you have configured in here. If you do not come into foo, then it will then use whatever's beyond here, which is just middleware 3. Okay, if that makes sense. So if the request comes in now. Did I not do my map? Oh, you know what? I do this all the time. Notice I still use app. So even though I have a lambda here, I'm actually using the wrong configuration helper. I need to use this configuration. There we go. So this gives you like a new app builder, but for the remainder of this branch. So it's good to make mistakes because you actually learn from them. There we go. So when the URL does not have foo in it, middleware 1 and 3 is called, and I can go to whatever other URL, same thing. But now I come into foo/whatever, and now notice I get both 1 and 2, but not middleware 3. Okay? So this kind of is a way you can partition up your app, and maybe if a call comes into like API, you go to Web API, and if you do SR, it goes to Signal R, something like that. Okay. Okay. So that's a couple other helpers with the middleware, and we have a question. Configuration method, is that called for every request? The answer is no. The configuration is called once when the app starts up. With global ASAX. So that's if your app starts up, you have to know what you want for middleware. I don't think they currently have any way to dynamically reconfigure your middleware. So you would have to do a recycle and to feature request for that, but I don't think they have anything like that now. Okay, let me show you one last thing, and I think we'll call it a day. The last thing is I promised you that the whole idea here is that then we could fit in other. I'll just mention this real quick. So some of the other middleware that Katana provides, they have static file middleware. So static file basically means you want to host up files from the file system out of your application. In IIS, this isn't really, IIS already handles this. But if you're doing a self-host, then this might be quite interesting. And they can do it from the file system, or they even have an approach where you can embed the resources, like the JavaScript or whatever, inside of your DLL, and it will load it from your embedded resource from the assembly, which is quite nice. They have CORS support at the middleware level as well. So again, I was the guy who contributed the CORS implementation to Microsoft in the last release. So this is actually some of my code running under the covers here. But so what happens is you can do CORS and configure it at the middleware level, and then in an entire subsection of your app can have CORS support. Okay, this is different CORS support than the Web API CORS support. Web API CORS support is specifically for your Web API. This allows you to push it up into the OWIN pipeline, like I said, to have sort of an entire section of your app, rather than down very, very fine grain with Web API. They're both using the same actual engine under the covers, so it's more just how do you trigger the CORS plumbing to run. So very fine grained, you would stick with Web API. Kind of more coarse grained, you would use this level. Yes, and so that's another question. Are the other frameworks like ServiceStack and Nancy are absolutely OWIN aware, and you are proving that the slides are in the right order. Thank you very much for that question. So this is then we're getting to the end where we then say, okay, now that you know the fundamental plumbing, you get the general idea, then you can start plugging in your application frameworks. So Microsoft's two are Web API and Signal R, but there are all these other frameworks out there that are open source frameworks that plug in to OWIN and Katana, and more people are moving this way. So, or Fubu or RavenDB, all in this OWIN pipeline, and you can even run them all together in the same application if you want, if that's what you desire. And it can be host independent too. Okay, so just to prove that real quick, I will do Web API just because that's the easiest one to demo. So what I'll do is I'm in my app here. I've never demoed it with Helios, but it shouldn't be a problem. But we'll manage NuGet. I will go grab stable only. I'll go grab Web API. And I'm going to grab Web API, but I'm going to grab the highest DLL or package I need, which is the Web API OWIN host, and I'm not seeing it. Let's do OWIN Web API. That's going to do, and here it is. That's what I want. So I'm going to grab a Web API OWIN host, and then this will pull in then all the other dependencies that it needs. So this is just a real easy way to get Web API in your app. Okay, fetch that. I'll hit accept. Pulls in all the stuff it needs. I'll hit close. And so what we're going to do then is, in my configuration, I will go somewhere in here. These are going to conflict with my my JSON that I might render. So maybe these are bad. This is not a good idea to be writing interfering with the body. But we'll put a breakpoint in here just to show you that it also works. Okay. Well, anyway, these are all hooked up. They're not really doing a whole lot. And then what I'll do is we'll go down. Maybe we'll do it at the end. You can do it again. You kind of pick where in the pipeline you want this to run. Again, usually your interception stuff would run first. So to configure Web API, you pull in the HTTP configuration. You can do, the new attribute routing, and then you simply do app.use, and now notice there's a new extension method here for use Web API. And you just pass in your Web API config, like that. Okay? So now what I can do is I can just create a quick Web API controller. So test controller. I'll make it an API controller. I'll do a public HTTP action result get, and I'll do return OK, testing, whatever. Okay. All right. So, I need a route. Let's do test. Okay. So if we run this, we don't have much going on. We'll do test, and there we are. Here's my testing, if you saw it, like that. So this is now running, and then just to prove that these middleware are in fact running as well, I'll put breakpoints in here somewhere. Like I can put a breakpoint here, and I put a breakpoint in here, and then I can also put a breakpoint in my method here. Okay, so I'll just load this up in Visual Studio or in my debugger. Okay, so notice the request came in. We got an invoke here. Okay, we got the next one here. Okay, that I think is for the favorite icon. Okay, a whole bunch of breakpoints, and the whole point here was to go to the test URL. So when I hit test, again, notice here my middleware 1 gets called. Now the middleware 3, because he's next in the pipeline. And then Web API is configured last in the pipeline, and there we are. We're in my test controller. Okay. There we go. So you can now load in whatever frameworks that you want that support OWIN, and they can all take advantage of this single pipeline. And again, this is quite useful because you can put common functionality in front of all of your frameworks if that's something that you need. Of course, logging, but also security, anything else that you would have used an HTTP module for. Okay. So I think that's about all I was gonna show. If you guys have other questions, there's, by the way, SignalR. If you want to use SignalR, they don't have a single package, at least as far as I could tell. So you had to add in these 3 packages from NuGet, and then just do your normal map SignalR to do this in a standalone OWIN server. Okay, so anyway, hopefully this kind of makes some of the new project templates a little bit more clear in terms of what they're doing in Visual Studio 2013. But we have OWIN as a spec for building these HTTP hosts and servers. Katana is Microsoft's implementation of that specification, and they're providing a lot of functionality at that level because this is where all of their energy is going forward for providing, features for all their various frameworks, which it makes a lot of sense. Like I said, I have a couple more sessions in the future. The next one is going to be on the security middleware. Katana has provided a lot of security features in the last release, and that's the next session is all about the security middleware. And then the third session is actually about ASP.NET Identity, which technically is totally unrelated to OWIN and Katana. Anyway, that's my third session. So anyway, thank you all very much. Here's my my webpage again if you guys want to jot that down, because that's where I will put the samples that I did today. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you, Peter, and everyone else from the LinkedIn.net user groups for having me.
It's all good, Brock. Thanks for coming along and doing the presentation for us. I'm certainly going to be trying some of this. Just out of interest, you do have about another 20 minutes or so if you want to use it. We typically do these for about 90 minutes.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to hang around and answer questions.
But yeah, anybody, if you've got any questions for Brock, please do make use of the time. Come ahead and ask him now. This is certainly something I think we're going to see a lot more of coming up. You know.
Yeah, like I said, Microsoft's definitely pushing, putting their effort into this.
Yeah, I've certainly seen it being pushed a lot as well. So
Yeah.
you know.
Just in terms of other things to show off here, there is the Katana project.codeplex. I think this is the right one. This is the actual project page for Katana on Codeplex. This is where you can look at all the source code. All this stuff is open source, and it will run on Mono if you want to do that, which is really quite interesting. This, of course, has the issue tracker. This is where any issues are that bugs that are submitted or feature requests. They hang out in Jabber. So actually, if you go and launch, I don't know if you guys know about Jabber, but Jabber's a nice little chat room that David Fowler and his crew basically put together to showcase SignalR. But one of the channels in here is an OWIN chat window. And so actually one of the guys who's from the Microsoft team, he's usually always here, but he's out on vacation this week on holiday. But anyway, you can literally come in and just ask questions, and there are tons of people in here that will answer questions about OWIN and just, the features. I'm just trying to
have a look at that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of other. And I hang out here as well, by the way. So as you can see, I answer some questions for some people. But so there are usually a lot of people. If you have questions or have problems, you can hang out and ask. Go ahead.
As well as that, guys, don't forget that we have our discussion group on LinkedIn and on LIDNUG itself. So I'm sure if you were to come along and start some discussions, there'd be plenty of people in there wanted to discuss that.
Yep.
Doesn't look like we're going to get any questions, so I think we'll just call it a wrap there then, Brock. Thank you very much for an enlightening presentation. Sorry the attendee count wasn't as high as it usually is. Thank you for being flexible enough to reschedule for us. We hope you'll come back at some time in the future with your other presentations. And it's all good. Thank you, everybody, for coming along.
Thank you again very much.
And it'll be up on YouTube as soon as we get the recording mixed down and put up there.